The story now begins to unfold in full detail. Here is part 1 expanded into about 1,300 words, written in simple, clear, and engaging English. I have avoided any violated or inappropriate content, and kept the tone smooth so the audience doesn't get bored. The sun was sinking behind the tall glass windows of the mansion when Victor Hamilton, one of the richest businessmen in the city, returned home earlier than expected. Victor was a man everyone knew, powerful, respected, but also feared by many because of his serious face and strict ways. People called him the man of steel because he never allowed emotions to guide his decisions. To him, everything in life was about order, planning, and discipline. But inside his massive home, things were very different. There, his heart was soft, especially when it came to his daughter, Emily. She was only 12 years old and had been living with a disability since birth. Her legs were weak, and she needed a wheelchair to move around. Victor loved Emily more than anything, but even with all his wealth, he could not heal her condition. This fact often weighed heavily on him. He gave her the best doctors, the most expensive treatments, and hired professionals to look after her. Yet, despite everything, Emily remained a quiet and lonely child. For years, Victor's house was filled with silence. His work kept him busy, and although he tried to be present, there was always a wall between him and his daughter. Emily rarely smiled. She rarely spoke with excitement. And deep inside, Victor feared that his money could buy comfort but not happiness. A few months earlier, Victor had hired a maid named Grace. She was a humble woman in her mid-30s, soft-spoken and hard-working. Grace had come from a modest background, and this job meant a stable income for her small family back in another part of the city. When she first arrived at the mansion, Victor thought of her simply as another employee. But soon, Emily started spending more time with her. Grace would read to her, take her to the garden, and sometimes sing songs while pushing her wheelchair around the flowers. Victor noticed the difference, but he didn't pay much attention until that one evening. As he entered the garden quietly, still holding his briefcase, he stopped in his tracks. There, under the soft orange glow of the sunset, he saw Emily resting her head against Grace's shoulder. Grace was hugging her gently, whispering something that made Emily laugh, a sound Victor had not heard in years. For a moment, he was frozen. The sight touched his heart in ways he could not explain. But soon, suspicion crept into his mind. He wondered, why is the maid holding my daughter so closely? Isn't that crossing the line? Victor cleared his throat loudly, and both Emily and Grace looked up. Emily's eyes lit up when she saw her father, but Victor's attention was fixed on the way Grace carefully moved back, almost embarrassed. "Daddy, Grace was just telling me a story," Emily said cheerfully. Her small hands clutched the armrest of her wheelchair, but her smile was wide. Victor forced a smile in return, though his thoughts were racing. He didn't want to embarrass his daughter, but he couldn't shake the image of that hug. After all, he was a man who believed in boundaries. To him, employees should do their jobs but not become too personal. Throughout dinner, the image replayed in his mind. Emily talked more than usual, telling him about the story Grace had shared. She laughed as she remembered the funny parts. Victor watched her carefully, realizing that she was happier than he had seen her in a long time. Still, questions troubled him. What does this maid really want? Is she using kindness to gain influence over my daughter? Later that night, when the house was quiet, Victor sat alone in his study. The shelves around him were filled with books, trophies, and awards from his successful business career. Yet his thoughts were not about money or deals. They were about the hug. He remembered his daughter's smile, bright, genuine, almost glowing. Then he remembered Grace's face, gentle but almost too familiar, as if she carried some secret. Victor was not a man who trusted easily. His life in business had taught him that everyone wanted something. Every kindness usually came with a price. So, He told himself, I must keep my eyes open. I cannot let anyone take advantage of Emily's innocence. The next morning, as Victor left for work, he paused at the door and watched from afar. Grace was feeding Emily breakfast. She leaned down to whisper something, and Emily laughed again. Victor felt a strange mix of emotions: jealousy, curiosity, and a little hope. All day at his office, he kept thinking about it. His advisors discussed important projects, numbers, and future expansions, but his mind wandered back to the garden, to that simple hug. Why did it bother him so much? Was it because he wished he could give his daughter the same comfort but didn't know how? By the time he drove home in the evening, Victor had made up his mind. He needed to understand who Grace really was. She wasn't just a maid anymore, she had become someone important in his daughter's life, and that meant he had to know the truth. That night, he decided to quietly observe more closely. As he stood near the garden doors again, he saw Grace teaching Emily how to water the flowers by guiding her hands. Emily was laughing, splashing water, and for the first time in a long time, Victor felt a warm tear in his eye. He quickly wiped it away before anyone could see. Still, he whispered to himself, I need to know what's behind this. The seed of curiosity had been planted. And soon, Victor would begin a journey that would not only reveal the shocking truth about Grace but also change his life and his daughter's forever. The next few days in the Hamilton mansion carried a different kind of energy. Victor, though still deeply involved in his business, had shifted a part of his focus toward observing Grace. Something about her closeness with Emily disturbed him, yet at the same time, it fascinated him. Each morning, before leaving for the office, Victor found himself lingering by the dining room longer than usual. He would sip his coffee silently, pretending to read the newspaper, while in reality, he was watching Grace. She moved around the table with gentle steps, preparing Emily's plate, cutting food into small pieces so his daughter could manage easily. Grace, tell me that story again, Emily would beg, her voice filled with excitement. And Grace, with her calm smile, would say, only after you finish breakfast, young lady. Victor noticed something: Emily listened to her. Not out of fear, but out of trust. She ate her food eagerly just to hear the rest of the story. At first, Victor's heart warmed, but suspicion was never far behind. He asked himself, why is my daughter sharing so much with a maid? Why does she listen to her more than to me? One evening, as they sat in the living room, Victor asked Emily directly, sweetheart, why do you like spending so much time with Grace? Emily looked at him with wide, honest eyes. Because she understands me, Daddy. She doesn't make me feel different. With her, I feel normal. Victor's chest tightened at those words. He wanted to be the one who made her feel that way, but instead, it was the maid. Still, he smiled at Emily and kissed her forehead, though inside, questions continued to trouble him. That night, when Emily had gone to bed, Victor called Grace into his study. She walked in nervously, unsure why the master of the house wanted to speak with her privately. Grace, Victor began, his deep voice steady, I want to ask you something. My daughter seems very close to you. Why? Grace stood still, her hands clasped together. Sir, children need more than care. They need love. Emily, she reminds me of someone very dear to me. I only wish to see her happy. Victor narrowed his eyes. That's very noble of you. But I want to know, are you hiding something from me? Is there any other reason behind this bond you share with her? Grace hesitated, lowering her gaze. No, sir. I have no hidden intentions. I just treat her the way I would treat my own child. Her words sounded sincere, but Victor was not fully convinced. His business instincts told him there was more to the story. He decided not to press further that night, but he silently promised himself he would get to the bottom of it. The following day, Victor spoke with his closest advisor, Mr. Carter. They met in Victor's office after a board meeting. "Carter," Victor said, "there's something unusual about the new maid." Carter raised an eyebrow. "Unusual? In what way?" "She's very attached to Emily. More than I expected. And Emily, she's changing because of her. She's happier. But I don't know if I should allow this." Carter leaned forward. "Victor, you know the world we live in. Sometimes, people take advantage of kindness to get close to wealth. You should be careful." Those words echoed in Victor's mind the whole evening. Carter was a man he trusted for years, and his warning only fueled the doubts that were already growing in Victor's heart. That night, Victor watched again from the shadows as Grace read a bedtime story to Emily. The little girl was laughing, her eyes sparkling with joy. Then Emily wrapped her arms around Grace and said softly, "I love you, Grace. Thank you for making me feel special." Grace's eyes filled with tears as she hugged the child back, whispering something Victor could not hear. The scene touched him deeply, but Carter's warning made his heart uneasy. What if this is all an act? He thought. A few days later, Victor decided to test Grace. At breakfast, he placed a small gold bracelet beside Emily's plate and waited. When Grace noticed it, she picked it up and said, "Emily, this must belong to you. Let's put it somewhere safe so it doesn't get lost." Victor watched carefully, hoping to catch a sign of greed. But there was none. Grace didn't even glance at the bracelet again. She simply focused on helping Emily eat. Still, the doubts did not leave his mind. That weekend, Victor invited a few friends to the mansion for dinner. As they gathered in the luxurious dining hall, he noticed how Grace moved silently in the background, attending to every need without drawing attention. One of his guests, a wealthy woman, whispered to Victor, "Your maid seems very close to the child. I've never seen Emily so lively." Victor forced a smile. "Yes, she has that effect." But later, in private, another friend remarked, "Be cautious, Victor. Sometimes the ones we least expect have hidden agendas." Those warnings kept piling up like heavy stones on his chest. Meanwhile, Emily continued to grow more cheerful. She would talk about her garden walks, the bedtime stories, and the little lessons Grace gave her about patience and hope. Victor felt both relieved and unsettled. His daughter was happier, yet he was unsure if it was safe to allow this bond to grow. One evening, after tucking Emily into bed, Grace quietly closed the door and nearly bumped into Victor standing in the hallway. "Sir," she said softly, "I didn't know you were here." Victor looked at her closely. "Grace, tell me honestly, why does Emily matter so much to you? I need to understand." Grace bit her lip, then replied carefully, "Because no child should ever feel lonely. She deserves joy. That's all I want for her." Victor studied her face for a long moment. Her eyes seemed genuine, but something in her tone hinted at a deeper truth. He nodded slowly but said nothing more. That night, as Victor sat alone in his study, he thought of everything: Emily's happiness, his friends' warnings, Grace's gentle words. His heart told him there was kindness in Grace, but his mind told him there was a secret yet to be revealed. And so, the questions grew stronger. What was Grace hiding? Why did she speak as if Emily reminded her of someone? And why did Victor feel that the hug he had once doubted was now the key to uncovering a truth that could change everything? The stage was set. Victor's suspicion was now mixed with curiosity, and deep inside, he knew the answers were waiting, answers that would shock him in ways he could never imagine. The following weeks inside the Hamilton mansion brought many small changes, some that Victor expected, and others that surprised him deeply. Emily was no longer the quiet and withdrawn girl she had once been. Instead, she was blooming like a flower finally touched by sunlight. She laughed more, she asked more questions, and sometimes she even tried to will herself around the house without help, just to show her father how independent she could be. Victor was pleased to see this transformation, but his sharp mind would not let him rest. He knew that Grace had something to do with it. In fact, she seemed to be the center of Emily's newfound happiness. Still, what troubled Victor was not the joy itself, it was the mystery behind it. What was Grace giving his daughter that no one else could? One Saturday morning, Victor decided to spend the day at home. He told his assistants not to disturb him, and he stayed quietly in his study, where the large glass doors opened out to the garden. From there, he could observe Emily and Grace without being noticed. The two of them were sitting under the tall oak tree. Grace had spread a blanket on the grass, and Emily was leaning back in her wheelchair, holding a small notebook in her lap. "Today, you'll write about your dream," Grace said kindly. Emily's face lit up. "A dream?" "Yes," Grace replied, "something you wish for. It doesn't matter if it sounds impossible. Just write it down. Dreams give us hope." Victor raised an eyebrow as he watched. He had never asked his daughter about her dreams. He was always too focused on her medical needs, her schoolwork, and her comfort. Yet here was Grace, encouraging Emily to think beyond her limits. Emily took the pen slowly, her small hands trembling, but then she began to write. When she finished, she showed it to Grace. "What does it say?" Grace asked gently. "I want to dance with my daddy one day," Emily whispered. Grace's eyes softened, and she hugged the little girl tightly. "And you will," she said. "Maybe not the way everyone else dances, but in your own way. One day, you will." Victor felt his throat tighten. His daughter had never spoken such words to him. In that moment, he realized just how much she had been hiding inside her heart. Later that evening, Victor confronted Grace again. "You've been encouraging Emily to think about things she never told me. Why?" Grace looked straight into his eyes. "Because she trusts me, sir. And sometimes, children need someone they can open up to without fear. Emily has so many feelings she has kept locked away. I only gave her the key." Victor didn't reply. He was torn between admiration and suspicion. On one hand, Grace had done what no doctor or tutor had managed to do, she had given Emily hope. On the other hand, her words carried weight, as if she understood suffering too well. That night, unable to sleep, Victor walked the halls of his mansion. The sound of his footsteps echoed against the marble floor. He paused by the door of Emily's room. The door was slightly open, and he peeked inside. Grace was sitting on the edge of the bed, holding Emily's hand as she drifted off to sleep. "I'll never leave you, Emily," Grace whispered softly. "You remind me so much of—" She stopped suddenly, as if catching herself. Victor's eyes narrowed. "Of who?" he wondered. The next day, his curiosity deepened. He began asking the staff discreetly about Grace. Most of them said the same thing: she was polite, hard-working, and never asked for favors. She sent money home to her family each month, but otherwise kept to herself. No one knew much about her past. Determined to uncover more, Victor called his private investigator. "Find out everything you can about Grace," he ordered. While waiting for the results, Victor continued to watch quietly. One afternoon, he joined Emily and Grace in the garden. Emily's face brightened when she saw him. "Daddy, come sit with us," she said happily. Victor sat down, and for the first time, he listened as Grace told one of her stories. It was about a little girl who had a brother who was very sick. The girl stayed by his side every day, helping him smile, even when life was difficult. When the story ended, Emily clapped her hands and said, "That girl is just like you, Grace." Victor caught the flicker of sadness in Grace's eyes. She quickly brushed it away and smiled at Emily. But Victor noticed. He always noticed. That evening, while Emily was busy drawing, Victor quietly asked Grace, Was that story about you? Grace hesitated. Her lips parted as if she wanted to speak, but then she shook her head. It was just a story, sir. But Victor's instincts told him otherwise. A few days later, the investigator returned with a file. Victor opened it eagerly. It revealed that Grace had once volunteered at a children's hospital many years ago. There, she had spent time with sick children, comforting them, reading to them, and sometimes just holding their hands. Victor's eyes widened when he read further. Grace had been particularly close to one little girl at that hospital. And the photo attached made his heart skip a beat. It was Emily, years younger, sitting in her wheelchair, with Grace by her side. Now everything made sense. The way Grace spoke to Emily, the way she understood her pain, the way Emily trusted her so easily, it wasn't new. They had known each other before. That night, Victor could not sleep. He paced his study, torn between emotions. On one hand, he was furious. Why hadn't Grace told him the truth from the beginning? On the other hand, he was overwhelmed with gratitude. Grace had been there for his daughter at a time when she was most vulnerable. When he looked at the photo again, he noticed something else. Emily's smile in that old picture was the same smile he now saw every day, the smile that Grace had brought back into her life. The truth was beginning to surface, but Victor knew this was only the beginning. Grace was carrying more inside her heart, and sooner or later, she would have to reveal it all. And when she did, it would change everything. Victor Hamilton sat in his study, the file from the investigator still resting on his desk. He had read it over and over, each time feeling a different rush of emotions: anger, shock, sadness, and gratitude. Grace had known his daughter before. She had been part of Emily's life long before she came to the mansion as a maid. But why had she never spoken about it? He remembered the photo: Grace kneeling beside a much younger Emily in her wheelchair, both of them smiling. That smile on his daughter's face was the very same one he saw now almost every day. Grace had brought it back. But the fact that she kept it a secret unsettled him. The next morning, Victor decided he could no longer stay silent. He found Grace in the kitchen, preparing Emily's breakfast. She looked up, surprised to see him there so early. "Grace," Victor said firmly, "we need to talk. Now." She wiped her hands nervously and followed him into the study. The heavy wooden doors closed behind them. Victor turned to face her, holding the file in his hands. "Why didn't you tell me?" he demanded. His voice was not loud, but it carried weight. Grace looked confused. "Tell you what, sir? That you already knew my daughter. That you were at the hospital with her years ago. That you were part of her life before I even hired you." Her eyes widened, and she lowered her head. For a long moment, she was silent. Then, finally, she spoke. "I wanted to tell you," she whispered, "but I was afraid you would send me away." Victor frowned. "Why would I? If anything, it makes sense now. Emily trusts you because you've been there for her before. But why hide it?" Grace took a deep breath, her hands trembling slightly. "Because I didn't want you to think I came here with an agenda. I didn't want you to believe I was using the past to gain this job. I only wanted to serve honestly, without suspicion." Victor's heart softened a little, but his sharp business-trained instincts kept him cautious. "Then tell me everything. I need the truth." Grace looked up, her eyes filled with tears. "Years ago, my younger brother was very sick. He was in the same children's hospital where Emily was treated. I used to spend hours there, not only for my brother but for other children too. I read stories to them, played little games, and tried to make them smile. That's where I met Emily. She was so small, so fragile, and yet her eyes carried so much sadness. I sat with her many times. We became close. When my brother passed away, I continued volunteering there for a while. But eventually, Life forced me to leave and find work. Victor's face softened as he listened. Grace wiped her tears and continued. When I walked into this mansion the first time and saw Emily again, I almost cried. I didn't expect to see her here. I didn't apply for this job because of her, I applied because I needed the work. But when I saw her, I knew God had given me another chance to keep my promise. Victor tilted his head. Promise? Yes, Grace said, her voice firm now. Back in the hospital, I promised Emily that she would never feel alone as long as I was around. At the time, I couldn't keep it forever. But when life brought me back to her, I swore I would do everything I could to bring happiness to her heart again. The room fell into silence. Victor leaned back in his chair, staring at her. The anger inside him faded, replaced by something deeper: respect, even admiration. But still, he asked the question that weighed on him the most. Why didn't you come to me directly with this truth? Grace lowered her gaze again. Because I was afraid, sir. You are a powerful man. I thought you would doubt me. I thought you would believe I was using my past connection to manipulate you or your daughter. So I stayed quiet and just focused on caring for her. Victor remained silent for a long while, his mind heavy with thoughts. For years, he had built walls around himself, believing no one could be trusted without reason. Yet here was a woman who had carried love in her heart without expecting anything in return. Finally, he spoke. Grace, I don't know what to say. I've spent millions trying to give Emily everything she needs, and yet, what truly made her happy wasn't money or doctors, it was you. Your presence, your care, your simple kindness. That's something I could never buy. Grace's eyes filled with tears again, but this time, she smiled. Sir, every child deserves love. And Emily, she deserves more than anyone. At that moment, Emily wheeled into the study, her face glowing. Daddy, are you two talking about me? She asked playfully. Victor quickly stood up and went to her side. He touched her hair gently. Yes, sweetheart. We were talking about how lucky we are to have Grace in our lives. Emily beamed. She turned to Grace and said, See, I told you my daddy would understand. Victor looked at Grace again, this time with softer eyes. For the first time, he allowed himself to see her not as just a maid, but as someone who had become part of their family. But deep inside, he also knew that this revelation was only the beginning. Grace had carried the secret for years, and now that it was out, there was still more to uncover. Her connection to Emily was clear, but Victor sensed there were deeper emotions in her heart, emotions she had yet to share. That night, Victor found himself reflecting on everything. Sitting alone by the fireplace, he realized how wrong he had been in some ways. He had always believed money solved problems, but here was proof that human connection could do what wealth never could. Grace's hug, once a source of suspicion, was now a symbol of healing. Still, one question echoed in his mind: what will this mean for the future? The mansion felt different now. It was warmer, brighter, filled with a kind of hope it hadn't seen in years. And Victor, though still cautious, began to feel something unusual: trust. For a man who had built his life on control and suspicion, it was both terrifying and liberating. And as he watched Grace guide Emily to bed that night, whispering encouragement and promises of brighter days, Victor realized that his world had changed forever. The shocking truth was out, but the journey was far from over. The final piece of Grace's heart still remained hidden. And when it came out, it would transform not only Emily's life, but Victor's as well. The days that followed inside the Hamilton mansion were unlike any Victor had experienced before. The heavy silence that once lingered in the grand hallways had now been replaced with laughter, gentle conversations, and the sounds of Emily's joy echoing through the house. For years, Victor had walked these halls thinking of them as walls of protection, but now he realized they had been walls of loneliness. Grace's presence had broken them down, piece by piece, and filled the home with something that even billions of dollars could not buy: genuine warmth. But while peace seemed to have settled, Victor could not ignore one final truth: there was still more to Grace's story. Her past, her deep empathy, and her mysterious connection to Emily hinted at something beyond what had been revealed. And though Victor had learned to trust her, he still wanted to understand completely. He needed clarity, not just as a father, but as a man who had lived most of his life searching for certainty in every corner. One evening, after Emily had gone to bed, Victor found Grace in the kitchen cleaning up. He gestured toward the garden. "Walk with me," he said. The night was cool, the sky painted with stars, and the sound of crickets filled the silence. They walked side by side until they reached the oak tree where Grace often sat with Emily. Victor paused and turned to her. "You've given my daughter happiness I thought was lost forever," he began. "For that, I'll always be grateful. But I need to ask you one last time, Grace. Is there anything else I should know? Anything more about why you care so deeply for Emily?" Grace hesitated, her eyes shining under the moonlight. Then, with a trembling voice, she spoke. "Sir, I told you about my younger brother, the one who was sick. What I didn't tell you is how much his condition shaped me. He couldn't walk either. He struggled every day, and I was his caretaker until the very end. I used to sit beside him the way I now sit beside Emily. I used to tell him stories, sing to him, and hold him when he felt he couldn't go on. When I lost him, I lost a piece of myself. So, when I met Emily all those years ago at the hospital, I saw in her the same pain I had seen in my brother's eyes. And I made a promise not just to Emily, but to myself that if life ever gave me a chance, I would not let another child with that pain feel abandoned." Victor listened quietly, his heart heavy but touched. Grace continued, her voice steady now. "That's why I hugged her, sir. That's why I treat her as more than a duty. To me, Emily is not just your daughter. She's the reminder that love can heal what medicine cannot. Every smile of hers is a small victory, not just for her, but for me too, for the promise I carry in my heart." For a long moment, Victor said nothing. He simply looked at Grace, realizing that the truth he had been seeking was not about deception or hidden agendas. It was about love, loss, and healing. Grace had carried a painful past, but instead of letting it break her, she used it to bring light to others. Finally, Victor spoke softly. "You've given my daughter something I couldn't, Grace. You've given her a sense of belonging. And you've given me something too, a lesson I will never forget." Grace lowered her eyes, humbled. "Sir, I only did what any heart would do if it truly cared." Victor placed his hand gently on her shoulder. "No, Grace. Not everyone would. That's what makes you different." The following day, Victor made an important decision. He called Grace and Emily to the living room, where the warm light from the chandeliers filled the space. He looked at Grace, then at his daughter. "From this day forward," Victor declared, "Grace is not just our maid. She is family. And more than that, I want to help her fulfill her dream. Grace, you once told me you wanted to become a nurse. I'm going to support you fully in completing your studies. You deserve it." Grace's hands flew to her mouth, tears streaming down her cheeks. "Sir, I don't know what to say." "Say yes," Emily said cheerfully, clapping her little hands. "Daddy is right. You deserve it, Grace." Grace knelt beside Emily, hugging her tightly. "Yes, sweetheart. Yes, I'll say yes." Victor smiled as he watched them. For the first time in many years, he felt truly at peace. His daughter was happy. His home was filled with warmth. And he had learned that sometimes the greatest treasures in life come from the most unexpected places. In the weeks that followed, changes began to unfold. Grace enrolled in evening classes to continue her education, while still caring for Emily during the day. Victor arranged tutors and resources for her, ensuring she had everything she needed to succeed. Emily, meanwhile, grew stronger in spirit. Inspired by Grace's stories and encouragement, she began to believe in her own possibilities. One afternoon, she told her father, "Daddy, I may not walk like other kids, but I can still shine. Grace taught me that." Victor's heart swelled with pride and gratitude. He hugged his daughter gently and whispered, "You shine brighter than anyone, my dear." Months later, on Emily's birthday, Victor arranged something special. In the ballroom of the mansion, decorated with flowers and lights, he asked the musicians to play a soft melody. He then wheeled Emily onto the dance floor. "Remember your dream, sweetheart?" Victor asked. "You wanted to dance with me one day." Emily's eyes sparkled. "Yes, Daddy." With Grace watching proudly from the side, Victor gently held Emily's hands and moved her wheelchair in rhythm with the music. To anyone else, it might have looked simple, but to Emily, it was magical. She was dancing with her father, something she had written as a dream in her notebook months ago. As the music played, Emily laughed, and Victor smiled through tears. Grace clapped her hands with joy, her heart full. In that moment, the promise she had made years ago at the hospital was fulfilled, not only to Emily, but to herself and to her late brother. The mansion, once cold and silent, had been transformed into a place of love, healing, and hope. And as Victor looked at Grace and then at his daughter, he realized the shocking truth he had once feared was not a danger, it was a blessing. It was proof that sometimes, strangers walk into our lives not by accident, but because they are meant to heal the wounds we cannot heal ourselves. Victor had spent years building empires and chasing success, but now he finally understood, the greatest success of all was not in wealth or power, but in love, trust, and the bonds of family. And so, as the night ended with Emily still smiling, Victor whispered to himself, "Thank you, Grace. Thank you for reminding me what really matters." The story of suspicion had become a story of healing. The hug that once raised doubts had now built a bridge of love. And for the Hamilton family, life would never be the same again.